It's you. It's me. It's Basketball by Association. Welcome in, everybody. It's the Southwest Division Preview Show. I'm Joel Cordes, the guy sitting somewhere next to me out in the electronic ether. It's not Arky Shea. He's got the week off, presumably to continue advancing his smooth jazz career. Instead, sitting in the second seat, Matt Dagostino from NBA.com, NBA TV, Turner, TBS, TNT, you name it. Matty Dags returns. I'm really pumped to have you back on the show, buddy.
I appreciate it. Now, is Arky the singer in the jazz career? Does he play an instrument? Where's he going?
Last I heard, it was a one-man band because no one else wanted to work with him. And so he's just, jack of all trades, master of something. He's not here. He will be back next week, I think. We're not even sure what division we're doing next week, so I'm not even going to preview that, but we have gotten to the Northwest Division preview. We did the Atlantic last week. Arky was kind enough to show up and talk about his Knicks. So if you want to go back and find those shows, they are on the YouTube channel. Like, share, subscribe. It's Basketball by Association. Ring that bell for us. If you want the audio-only version, Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast, that's where you will find us. Maddie, this is episode 119, and as you and I spoke off the air, last time you were here, we were still naming it after jersey numbers. We can't do that anymore. It's career playoff games. There's actually 6 players in NBA history who have hit that 119 career playoff mark. With no disrespect to the great Wes Unseld, the Hall of Famer, he would have been the no-brainer to put on here, but I have stuck in the back of my mind, and this is what 119 shows does to you, and a really bad record keeping of who we've had in the past. I feel like we probably did a Wes Unseld Jr. back in the day based on his jersey, and I wanted to go a little more obscure with that, and a guy that I've kind of nicknamed Mr. Misconception. So it's not going to be John Paxson. It's not going to be Caldwell Jones. It's not going to be Leandro Barbosa. Those guys are all very, deserving. We could have gone their route, and it's actually 5 players, not 6. But this right here is going to be the Boris Diaw episode. 119 playoff games for Boris Diaw, and the most improved player in 2005-2006 was a champ in 2014, which surprised me because cloudy memory, it hasn't been all that long, figured Diaw got at least 2 rings there in San Antonio, and he actually only got 1. But my biggest memory of Diaw coming in was drafted by the Atlanta Hawks, a dark season 03-04, and was drafted to be a point guard coming out of France. And that experiment lasted about 30 games for the Hawks before they were trying to switch him around. And of course, this is a guy with some really distinct, unique chapters in his career. Phoenix Suns, 7 seconds or less as a running mate of Steve Nash and those guys. Then some really lost seasons with the Charlotte Bobcats, where best statistical output of his career on some of the worst teams of all time. Goes to San Antonio, suddenly becomes really a jack of all trades, master of just about everything in little ways. So much fun. And then, wound up in Utah for a season that nobody remembers, but did get that championship. So we'll hope to do you proud, Boris Diaw. This is episode 119. We're going to start off Southwest Division preview, which means at the top, we got to go with the Memphis Grizzlies, a team that they gave us a fun season. Second in the Western Conference, monumental first round series against my Minnesota Timberwolves. I enjoyed every minute of it except the way that it ended. But one of those up and coming teams that we've seen coming at us, Matt, for the last couple of years, and they have arrived now. They are a clear contender in the Western Conference. Just any thoughts that you had coming out of last year as we move into this new season?
Yeah, I think the word I would use is culture with them. I think Taylor Jenkins has instilled that culture with them to where, don't get me wrong, they've got Ja Morant, they've got a lot of nice pieces around him, but I think a lot of people would say they may have overachieved at this stage of their culture building process last season, to the point where people were like, where are these guys coming from? We thought they'd be good, but not this good. And I think a lot of that credit goes to Taylor Jenkins, who has really put a mindset in. The talk of that team last year was how well they played without Ja Morant, which defies logic in every sense of the word. Your best player goes out and you guys play like 800 ball without him.
Yeah.
Especially a guy who's so instrumental as a point guard, their leading scorer, their playmaker. I think the culture is just where it needs to be for them. It'll be interesting to see what the next step for them is. How do they go from being an overachieving contender to a team that's there year after year?
And a team that's not going to sneak up on anybody. Not that they really did last year, but you're right. There was still a lot of maybe skepticism early on in the season. You talk about culture. I kind of piggybacking off that. This team has a clear identity, and it's rooted with just enough in the past of that grit and grind mentality. I like the analogy of, those Zach Randolph, Marcus All, Mike Conley teams. They would drag you into the alley and kick the crap out of you. But this Memphis Grizzlies team, they'll do that, and then they'll go smooth talk a girl, right? Because they've got some flash, they've got some sizzle in addition to that toughness where you are in for a fight every single time that you're going to face them. And it's that usable depth. To me, that's what's really surprising. We knew Ja Morant's going to be good. Dylan Brooks has shown us some things over the last couple seasons. Jaron Jackson Jr., when he's on the floor, and we'll get to him in a little bit because he's hurt again, when he's on the floor is so valuable for what they do. So there's those pieces, but then there's the Desmond Bains and Tyus Jones and, even John Conchar. Brandon Clark was so valuable for them. Xavier Tillman, he came in and filled great minutes for them too. Like, they just seem to be able to plug and play anybody into these different situations. And it's not just a team that overachieves. It's a bunch of relatively unheralded guys who have stepped up and fit perfectly together. So as we look at them previewing for this year, it wasn't a lot of movements that they made. There's not, Danny Green comes aboard. That's basically it. But who are you really zoomed in on that you like heading for this year? For these other teams we've talked about, like the moves that we really liked, we really can't do that with the Grizzlies because it's not broke, so they ain't going to try to fix it.
Yeah, the first name that comes to mind is the guy you mentioned, Sharon Jackson Jr. If they could ever get a full consistent season out of that guy, he changes everything they do on the floor. A guy who can go out and get double-doubles with ease. He's got a little bit of range to his game, so he can guard out on the perimeter. He can play offense out on the perimeter. He can facilitate a little bit. But the defense, I think, is what changes that team so dramatically. A guy who can go get you 5, 6, 7 blocks in a game is just so valuable to what they're doing. And they have kind of, along with Ja, built this team around him, and he just hasn't been able to get on the floor consistently enough. So if that ever happens, I think we see a different dynamic from this team on the whole. And then the other guy for me is, you mentioned it, these are guys that are maybe a little bit unheralded, but as they continue to evolve their games, Desmond Bain is another guy who just, relatively unknown coming into the league. And you want to talk about toughness, the grit and grind. I heard NFL broadcasts talking about him as a linebacker, receiver type, a guy you just don't want to run into. And he's got that mentality too. So he's been a guy who can go get you 20 on most nights. Those two guys to me are the guys that will elevate their games enough to we're kind of out of this big three era for the most part,
right?
With a lot of these teams. But if you want to talk about getting a central core of stars, those are the guys that are going to need to improve their games and develop extra things for the Grizzlies to kind of rise to that level.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was headed to, in that I think as the Grizzlies were really first coming up and as Ja Morant came in and people only half paying attention to them, there was this stereotype that it was just Ja Morant and friends. You've got this 20-point per game scorer and a bunch of other guys who are all okay. But that's not the case when Bain and Dylan Brooks are both tracking towards being consistent 20-point per game scorers. We saw it with Brooks before he got hurt. And like Bain, Brooks has got that linebacker type body, that mentality, that toughness. It fits in with their DNA of the team. Jaron Jackson Jr., who you mentioned. I love the quick hands that Triple J has. He is a quick twitch blocker in that his hands may be down in a stance. He's working on a steal, but he's still up to get that block. It's not a guy who's playing two hands up all the time and is just there. He's got such great instincts, such great timing. And you're right, he changes that defensively. I love the pairing when healthy of Triple J and Steven Adams, though I know Adams kind of fell out of the playoff rotation and then fell back into it. But they've got multiple guys. That's 4 guys at least. And Brandon Clark on certain nights can give you 20. Tyus Jones on certain nights is going to give you in the high teens. They've got scoring punch beyond Ja. And I got to see Morant play late regular season. My wife came along. She's not a huge basketball fan, but she knows enough. And she loves her point guards. And the first thing that stood out to her with Ja Morant was just how unselfish he is for the guy who clearly drives every wagon, every bus. He just kept everybody happy and fed throughout that game and picked his spots. And I can't say enough about Ja and the feel that he has for the game, knowing that. I don't know if you've got anything to add on there, but that ability to be the guy while still making everybody else feel like they're the guy is a true leadership quality that very few superstars are able to pull off.
And I think it helps him in a little bit as he's kind of maturing into this superstar that we're watching his first couple of years in the league. I think it may help him in terms of this. There is no other star on that team. He is clearly the alpha dog on that team.
Mm-hmm.
And he can kind of mold his game and mold this team into what plays into his strengths very well. And I obviously the scoring is there, the athleticism and the playmaking is there, but the vision is there. We heard that coming out of Murray State. We heard the vision was incredible and it's translated to the NBA level. But I think a great thing to keep in perspective with this team is we've talked about, what's their next step. They're not a team that's going to be drafting in the lottery anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not a free agent destination. So it's not like you can look at it and say, okay, when this guy comes off the books or these guys come off the books, we can go after free agent A. It's not that kind of team. So they're kind of looking around the locker room and saying, like, this is it, guys. These are our guys. And we are going to have to develop. And I think that's part of the coaching staff's strengths, as we've seen with the guys we're talking about here. Tyus Jones is the prototypical, perfect backup point guard in the NBA. Now he's being paid like he is. But it's that kind of mentality where it's not like, okay, who can we bring in from the outside? It's no, here's what we've got. We need to mold it into something that can be a contender year in and year out.
And it's a testament to the maturity of that young core that goes at least 10 deep. And they're going to need somebody like David Roddy or Santi Aldama, maybe Killian Tilly, one of those guys to step up a little bit and soak up some minutes while Triple J is out. So we may find yet another kind of unsung diamond in the rough out of this group, but it's at least 10 deep. It's a testament to their maturity that Memphis has not really felt the need to go out and bring in veterans, maybe over the hill veterans, a bunch of them to help, normalize, stabilize the locker room, lead the way. They've had one of those guys on the roster each year. And this year it's going to be Danny Green. We don't even know how many minutes Danny Green is going to get in Memphis at this point. He still can defend. He still can knock down a three, but he seems to get streakier and streakier with every, passing season. As we look at all the positives that this team has, for each team, we also got to dig into a concern heading into the year. And I'll just give you mine and see what you think. And if you want to go in a different direction, that's totally cool. My biggest concern comes back to Triple J and the amount of time that might be missed, because we've seen him miss big chunks of time before. And it may be unfair. It may only be perception, but it seems like with most of those injuries, they've lasted longer than initially advertised, the recovery period. There's been a propensity for re-injury along the way. And I'm just wondering at what point do the Grizzlies go, he's going to be there and helpful for us, hopefully, but we can't keep relying on him as a cornerstone. And he's so young. It's so early. Like you said, there's not a lot of free agents walking through that door. The draft picks they're really going to have to, dig in and hit on something that's unseen. But it feels like we're getting close to that point. And it feels like that type of absence, as good as everybody else has been and could again be the difference between Memphis being a front runner in the West and suddenly drop into like 5th place as a really good team, but not quite good enough,
Absolutely. That's a completely fair point and a fair outlook on how things may go for them. I'll veer a little bit into what you were talking about there at the end. I won't even call it complacency because I don't think it's that kind of an organization. I don't think that's the culture there, but maybe comfortability is maybe a better word. They were, am I right? They were the 2 seed in the playoffs last year.
Yeah.
Like, there's not many other places you can go above that. But there are teams below them last year that are improving, they're restocking, they're retooling, or maybe had a down year themselves that are coming after them. So it's one thing to be a 2 seed one year. It's another thing to come back the next year and be a 2 seed or a 1 seed and keep building on it. And you hit the nail on the head. They could be a 5 seed next year, and it doesn't make them a bad team by any stretch of the imagination. But do they look at it and say, we were the 2 seed last year? Like, we're pretty good. Like, no, like that cannot be the mentality at all in the Western Conference. The way teams are going to be gunning after them like that. And they work for everything they get. I don't think much necessarily comes easy to that team. And so, again, it's a testament to everything that they did last year that they were able to end up where they were. But it's not like in Golden State where you just roll out Steph and Clay and Draymond and you're, a top 3 team almost no matter what happens unless you get catastrophic injuries like they've had. They really have to work for everything they get. So not settling for what they did last year, but still trying to improve upon that, I think it'll be a real test for a younger team.
I mean, there always seems to be 1 or 2 of those teams every year. That was really good, and it's typically a younger team. It was really good the previous season. They read their own press clippings. They want to just roll it out, repeat. You saw the Atlanta Hawks do that last year. Such a massive disappointment after a wonderful season before that. We saw young Boston Celtics teams early in the Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum era kind of fall into that too. The one thing I'll say for the Grizzlies and why I'm a little bit less concerned about that complacent mentality, as you alluded to, in that culture, I don't think it's just, or it doesn't come across as taking pleasure just in getting wins and standings and chasing that. And obviously that's what it's all about. There seems to be that taking pleasure in really just punching other teams in the mouth, like just having that all out physical game and trying to wear somebody down. And it's almost focusing on the trees and letting the forest take care of itself. And that's one of the things that's made Memphis so much fun to watch and so tough as an opponent. Brass tacks time before we move on to the next team on the list. Do you see Memphis finishing similar in second? Better? Can they nab the first? Or do you see them dropping off just a little bit? And at the end of the show, we'll order the whole division and all that stuff. But just as far as the Grizzlies go.
Yeah, I see them dropping off a little bit. Not much, but kind of in that 3 to 5 range, probably. I'm one who was maybe a bit more surprised that they finished second than most people. So I really think they overachieved to get to where they were last year, and give them all the credit in the world for doing that. I think they settle a little bit more into the middle of the conference as this season rolls on.
Do you see them winning the division still?
Yeah, I do. Okay. We'll get to the other teams there in a little bit, but I'm more faithful in the consistency that they have as compared to some of the other teams in the division as we move forward.
Joel Cordes hanging out with you here on Basketball by Association, joined by Matt Dagostino from TNT, Turner, TBS, NBA.com, NBA TV. You can find him doing a whole bunch of different things, video production, voiceover, reporting, all that good stuff. 4 games back of the Memphis Grizzlies, Matt, were the Dallas Mavericks with 52 wins on the year. And we all know that it starts and stops with Luka Doncic. He's had a wonderful summer playing over in Eurobasket, continues just to show us that he's a top 3 player in the NBA at this point. There's really no way to try to get around that anymore. But Dallas did make some moves during the offseason because, unfortunately, everything starts and stops with Luka Doncic, and that hasn't been quite enough for the Mavericks to get where they want to go, but we have seen incremental improvements. You saw Spencer Dinwiddie brought in midway through last season from the Washington Wizards, was coming off some major injury issues, but started to at least, you saw what the idea was with Dinwiddie on that team, even if you didn't always have it play out as successful as they wanted, but he did give them some good minutes and some good moments and enough hope. Tim Hardaway Jr. returns from injury, hopefully at some point here early in the season. The big signing, it's not JaVale McGee, though we will talk about him. I'm happy that he's aboard. Christian Wood brought in from the Houston Rockets, so across from the division. I'm really intrigued by this. I'm going to nominate that early as the best move of the offseason. I want to get your thoughts on Christian Wood as well, and just this whole Dallas team where they've struggled to consistently find that other 20-point per game scorer. But now it seems like with Dinwiddie in the mix, Tim Hardaway Jr. hopefully back, if those 2 guys can stay healthy, and with Christian Wood, you've got not 1, not 2, but 3 different guys to choose from who could give you those 20 points on any given night. And the hope is that multiple of them will do that.
Yeah. So I mentioned briefly kind of that big 3 era kind of dissolving in the NBA the past few years. I think the Dallas Mavericks are the exhibit A of that dissolve in the NBA, where I think they've learned, and the results bore out more last year, that it wasn't about bringing in a second or a third superstar with Luka like they tried to do with Porzingis.
Yeah.
But it's really just go, like, give the ball to Luka and let him do what he's going to do. They rely more on one superstar than I think any other team in the league at this point. The usage rate bears that with Luka. It's absurdly high. But I think they did a nice job of retooling around him this year that can still be their identity, and you could still see improvements. I think the Spencer Dinwiddie trade that they executed that you mentioned was a kind of a precursor to, I think they knew they were going to lose Jalen Brunson. So that combo guard that can kind of accent Luka's skill set, I think is helpful for them. And I think the biggest problem they've had in recent years is a lack of front court depth. They've had Maxi Kleber, who's useful. They brought in Davis Bertans, who's been a disappointment for the contract he got. And Boban is a walking comedy show in terms of personality and entertainment. And he's useful on the court, but he's not going to be that kind of piece for them. So the fact that they brought in Christian Wood via trade is some front court punch that they can bring offensively, that they haven't really seen in recent years. And you mentioned JaVale McGee. I think he adds another solid piece to that front court that's reliable. It's funny. He's been a guy who has kind of turned around his career persona to the laughing stock of his early years to now. Everywhere JaVale McGee goes, some of it is he's been wise on where he's gone, but his teams are in the playoffs, and he's contributing to those teams. So I think the experience he got in Golden State, the experience he got in Phoenix has helped mold him and helped him learn what it takes to be a winner in this league. So I definitely like the front court depth that they've established this offseason.
If nothing else, JaVale McGee gives them a quote-unquote normal, traditional center body on the roster, which is something they've lacked the last couple of years because Porzingis, while certainly big enough, and Marjanovic certainly big enough, Boban's too slow, gets caught in the pick and roll. Porzingis had mobility issues coming off of injury. Dwight Powell, Maxi Kleber, both very useful, as you said, defensively, but they're undersized at what they do. Bertans is not a defender, so it just gives them that different look. Hopefully they don't have to use it all that much, but I have a feeling they will wind up, finding those spots for McGee and using him quite a bit. As I look at this roster, and especially at Christian Wood, it's the ability to finish plays, which, you know you're going to have to do if you're playing with Luka, because the ball's going to be in his hands so much. But that ability to, during the few times that Luka sits or that he needs that breather, you can run a play for Christian Wood. He can score the ball. He's got flaws in his game, this is true, but scoring is not one of them. And same thing with Spencer Dinwiddie. We've seen defenses tee off on him before. He can get overexposed, but when he's got guys to pass to, and Dallas, they've got a lot of different weapons that can give you 10 points on any given night and knock down some shots. Just don't ask them to do too much more than that. You know, we're talking about Dorian Finney-Smith, Reggie Bullock, you know, even Davis Bertans, who was supposed to be able to give you more than that. But there's some weapons there. There's some options. It really is going to come down to Luka's ability to get you almost 30 every night and somebody else to be up over 20 out of those three that we've mentioned. And hopefully one other that's close to that. And I think that's going to be Christian Wood more often than not. I'm a little bit concerned about what we'll see from Tim Hardaway Jr., but we know why he's there, and that's just to put the ball in the basket too. What's your biggest concern for this Dallas Mavericks team then? You know, did we touch on it already? Is that continued lack of depth, or
if this makes sense? Well, I think the Christian Wood move is one that maybe helps them the most. My concern with them is his career has been in Detroit when he was trying to keep a roster spot and comes out of nowhere once he gets some playing time. And you're like, oh, this guy is an NBA player. To then going to Houston, where he gets the contract, but the team is awful. And he has never really had to be in a system. He's kind of been able to play his game without restraints. And now I think there are going to be useful restraints on him, but he's not going to be asked to necessarily go out and give me 20 every night. He's not going to be given the green light to be like, you know what, we're on a 25-win team. Just go ball out and see what the stats have. I think he's a guy who has been, if you just look at the numbers, you say, okay, he's a really good player. But fitting into a playoff contending team where he's going to have a role that's going to be more restrictive in areas where it hasn't been before, I kind of want to see where he's at in the headspace of playing within a team scheme. I'm not saying he can't do it. I just he hasn't had to prove that he could to this point so far, if that makes sense. I just think they have designs for him, and he is going to have to fit into that mold of what they're wanting out of him.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And we've seen plenty of players who stacked up all the stats on bad teams throughout their careers, and it just wasn't the same when they had to jump into those higher expectations, you know, and where every game mattered every single night. That excellent point. My biggest concern for them kind of comes back to that overall depth. We saw last year just that feeling, despite the fact they won the 52 games, they got fourth place. Tim Hardaway Jr.'s absence was felt really hard while he was gone. Whenever Porzingis was out, you just knew it. There wasn't somebody to be able to cover that. And sure, a lot of teams can say that, but it just feels like Dallas, their second tier of guys, there's nobody out of that group that's built to be able to step up into a bigger role, especially when it comes to scoring. It's just more chips get pushed over to Luka's side of the table, and he's told to go do something with that when there are those injuries. And so, again, you know, Dinwiddie has had his issues before. Tim Hardaway Jr. is coming off injury. We're a Christian Wood injury away in the front court from being right back where they started last year of getting no production out of those spots, you know, offensively. So maybe that's just what happens when you're in a place where you've got that max contract superstar. And like you said, we're not in that era of being able to fit guys together so much anymore. But Dallas has proven time and again that they are not a big free agent destination. And it is not for lack of trying. They have tried to get those names in there, and they seem to strike out every single year. So, Manny, same finish, better finish, worse finish. What do you see in general for the Dallas Mavericks?
I'm actually a little bullish on the Mavs this year. I think you mentioned maybe Christian Wood, you're labeling as maybe one of the best offseason moves. I don't know what Vegas has gotten at right now, but I have to think Luka, if he's not the front runner for MVP at this point this year, has got to be one of the top 2 or 3.
And it feels like it's narrative time for Luka, right? It feels like it's narrative time. The NBA loves this. He's been building towards it. He's been robbed once or twice. It just feels like this is the year that they're going to want that to happen.
Yeah, and I think the team has been built this offseason with that in mind. I think we saw what he could do, not only to get himself going, but to get everybody else going. And they saw results from it this year in the playoffs, to where nobody wanted to play against Luka. And you even ask the teams that were playing against them in the playoffs, and you're like, what do you do? You don't do anything. You hope he doesn't go for 40, 10, and 10. And, you try to limit what the other guys can do. But I think the league has come around to knowing they can't stop Luka. And I think more than any other team, the Dallas Mavericks are embracing that and gearing that whole team to build around one player. They tried it with Porzingis. It didn't work. They tried doing other things. Like you said, they've tried getting free agents in there for years, and it just hasn't worked out the way they wanted to. And they finally said, you know what? To hell with it. We've got one of the top players in the league. We know what he can do. Let's get guys around him that will maximize his potential and his output. And getting to the conference finals last year, to me, if I'm in Dallas, tells me, Jason Kidd, that like we got results. We improved. We got to a place we hadn't been to in a while. Let's stick with this and ride it out and see where it takes us.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you had predicted Memphis probably still winning the division. Dallas is, probably in second. And I would lean towards that too. We'll get to like final standings, but I have a real hard time picking where I want to fit the Dallas Mavericks, despite all the things you and I just said, because of the next team coming behind them. And that's the New Orleans Pelicans, one of the, I think, most compelling teams of this offseason. Not only because of the way that they finished last year and they got into the playoffs and they gave us a really good series. It's not just the fact that Zion Williamson is supposedly healthy now, supposedly at a much healthier playing weight and physique level. And we've seen what Zion can do. We're getting ready for that. But they're intriguing to me because of that youth and because of how much against the NBA grain we saw them go under Willie Green last year. This is a massive team as far as size goes and length. They are big at just about every position. And even at the point guard spot, they've taken a shooting guard ostensibly who was a little undersized, and that was CJ McCollum. And now he's at size point guard, slightly big enough. But then you're trotting out plus 7 foot wingspans at just about every other spot on the floor at any given time. And when you sub in one of the little guys, you still have 4 with length. And Zion, while not a huge wingspan guy, not a huge height guy, his ability to get off the floor really makes up for that. The leaping ability. Like, I can't think of a team built like this body-wise in a long, long time. And they're mobile, they're athletic, they can shoot. I'm excited to see what they can do. And yeah, all of us are rooting for Zion Williamson to come back so we can watch him.
Yeah, I mean, for the sake of your viewership, I will not end every sentence with Zion Williamson, but I think I can't emphasize enough how important he is to this whole thing with them. Obviously, with him being out, you're just disappointed as a fan of the game. I think anybody wants to see him in there and healthy, and he's still a little bit of a question mark in terms of what is he at the NBA level. We saw a lot of things that he can do. The efficiency with which he scores, the volume at which he scores is tantalizing to even think about. But I think everything this team has hinges on Zion Williamson. But I think for a couple of years, we started to think, like, what is David Griffin doing? Like, we saw him work wonders in Cleveland and get them to a championship. And when he gets hired by New Orleans, you're thinking, well, this is great. He's a proven winner. He knows what he's doing. And they kind of fell flat on their faces for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. But all of a sudden, they turn that corner towards the trade deadline and get CJ McCollum. And all of a sudden, the pieces start fitting in place a little bit. And they still have huge draft capital. They still have young pieces if they want to go out and add a superstar. I was rooting, and I thought, honestly, maybe the best fit for Kevin Durant this offseason, if that was going to evolve into something, was you don't want to see Brandon Ingram grow, because I honestly think the best player comp for him is probably Kevin Durant in terms of body type and abilities and all of that stuff. But you imagine if you trade Brandon Ingram and some other pieces for Kevin Durant and put him in there with McCollum, with Zion, with Valanciunas. I mean, you're talking about a fantastic team, but I think that speaks to the potential of this roster, in that there are still moves that could easily be made. But I think that's also a testament to the young talent that they brought in, that maybe we weren't as astute as David Griffin was. Herb Jones is a great defender. Already after a rookie season, they think he's one of the better defenders in the entire league, which says a lot about guy that, I don't know where he was on a lot of draft boards, but he certainly wasn't near the top on any of them. Jose Alvarado, who I actually had a chance to watch in college, being down literally across the street from work at Georgia Tech. What a pest he is. And I mean that in the best possible way. But there's a guy who doesn't have an NBA resume in terms of size and tangible abilities. He's not a scorer. He just annoys the hell out of you, and in all of the best ways possible. For them to take him and turn him into a useful piece, especially in a postseason atmosphere, I thought was a wonderful job by the coaching staff there. And so part of my job at Turner is during the playoffs, I run a group. We watch every press conference, every interview, all of those inside tracks that you see on TNT. And at the end of the postseason, we put together a best of sound, all the best sound bites, the wacky ones, the intense ones, whatever the case may be. And one sound bite stood out to me above all the other ones from last year's playoffs. And it was actually from the play-in tournament. Willie Green just was, we've heard Pop in the huddle, I want some nasty, those kinds of things that live on. Willie Green was saying, we're not done. We've got to fight. And he goes down the line. You've got to fight. You've got to fight. And it was just like, I didn't know Willie Green had that in him. I didn't know much about Willie Green, the person. I've heard great things about his coaching acumen and everything, but to see him and the amount that he cared for his guys and was able to rally those guys gave me a whole new respect for him and the hire by David Griffin as well. So I think we have to give a lot of credit to David Griffin and how he very quickly turned them from an underachieving team to an up-and-coming team from the deadline on last season.
Yeah, and they've cycled through some different players over the last couple of years to try to find that mix. You mentioned the draft picks of late, a guy like Trey Murphy. There was some expectation for him, but a lot of question marks. You see what a usable player he can be. Again, it's that long wingspan in addition to some shooting. Jackson Hayes coming in very, very raw. I
love that guy, though.
Yeah.
Jackson Hayes is a beast when he puts it together.
They've been patient. They've had the time to give him that patience, as they've not been very good, but they're going to get rewarded with that. And to be able to put Hayes and Brandon Ingram up front alongside Zion Williamson long-term, which is obviously the plan. And then to be able to cycle in Herb Jones, Trey Murphy around him. It's almost like whatever you do with the point guard spot will take care of itself. Whether it's McCollum there long-term or you switch him to shooting guard, is it going to be Alvarado? Obviously, Kira Lewis Jr. is still in the mix coming back from injury. Dyson Daniels, they just drafted. They've got some interesting options there. But that 2 through 5 spot, and Valanciunas, you got a veteran in Larry Nance Jr. coming over. Willie Hernan-Gomez had a great offseason playing in Eurobasket. They've just got so many different options now for Willie Green that give you different looks. And typically a team that standing wise was middling and the last couple years has been disappointing, I don't think typically has the kind of depth that New Orleans has. And I think people are sleeping on that. They don't really realize that because they didn't seem like a deep team last year yet, just because you saw flashes from guys, but they weren't necessarily ready yet. Biggest concern coming into the year, is it just too obvious to go Zion's health, or do we have to go that route? Because like you said, you could end every sentence with Zion Williamson with this team.
It's the obvious choice, but it doesn't make it a bad one by any stretch of the imagination. I'll go in this direction though. I'll go with youth is the biggest concern. You mentioned they didn't seem like a deep team until the end of the season. I think part of that was you can't underestimate the impact that good playoff performances have for teams and more so for individuals. I think seeing Herb Jones defend in a national spotlight, seeing Jose Alvarado defend in a national spotlight, and annoying one of the best point guards that we've ever seen in Chris Paul endlessly. I mean, that Chris Paul did not want to utter Alvarado's name just because he thought he was going to give him too much respect, but he couldn't wipe that off of his face in terms of you knew he was getting under Chris Paul's skin the entire time last year. But you see those things on a national stage and you're like, oh, like we didn't know we had that. But it is still a very young team. And even Zion, as young as he is age-wise, is even younger in terms of NBA games played. Yeah. Like, he's basically amassed a total of less than a season in a uniform on the NBA level. So there's still a lot for that team to learn. It seems like Willie Green is the right guy to help cultivate that learning process. But if this team, who I think has one of the widest variances of potential outcomes in the entire league this year, from maybe it kind of sticks that way. I don't think it does, but maybe they underachieve again. You never can really tell. And this team could just be this year's Memphis Grizzlies in terms of vaulting up the standings in the Western Conference. But I think a lot of that hinges on the youth and the development of that youth.
I have the concern of, I guess, irony being what it is, that maybe we get that full healthy season from Zion and he's phenomenal. And then loving irony would be that we don't get much of a season from Brandon Ingram, who has also dealt with injury issues. And to me, it's that question of not only can we see Zion healthy, can we get both of those guys healthy and keep them healthy at the same time? Because if the answer keeps being no, even this early in the experiment, that's got to be a major, major question mark about the trajectory of this team, because it seems like the clock just ticks tighter in New Orleans. We already had all sorts of rumors that Zion wanted out, and we saw Anthony Davis flee after a set time, and Chris Paul gave them a little bit more time, but eventually that was it. And keeping those superstars there, like they found something that maybe last year with Willie Green and company not only saved that season, but maybe just saved this entire era for the Pelicans and gave it a new lease on life, where you saw some hope and people wanted to get in on that, and Zion did not want to be the guy to step out of that. But that can turn so quickly. And so I think there is an urgency to figure out whether Ingram and Zion stay healthy together,
That's a great point, that if we've noticed anything in the last 5 to 10 years, it's that just because a guy's under contract doesn't mean that he's going to stay in that place for the entirety of it. So just brace yourselves, Pelicans fans, that, despite Zion signing the extension this offseason, we've seen that can change in 1 year. All it takes is a superstar to say, I want out. And more times than not, a team is going to be so leery of, well, we want to make sure we treat the superstars well so others will want to come back here, that it can change very quickly. So urgency is a great way to sum that up, in terms of, you want to find out whether you're good enough to compete, but you also want to find out, do the pieces fit together? And with the health of Zion being a never-ending concern, the sooner you can find that out, the sooner you can kind of figure out where the direction of the franchise is going.
We'll circle back to the Pelicans at the bottom of the show when we order the division and predict all that stuff. I'm Joel Cordes. He's Matt D'Agostino. You're watching Basketball by Association. You can find us on YouTube. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell over there if you want the video version. Audio only at Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. Moving down the list here, we get to the San Antonio Spurs. And I hate to do this because San Antonio has always been my second team. I grew up in Minnesota. The Timberwolves only lasted so far into the playoffs. It was usually the first round. It was the KG era. And so the Spurs were always my second team. Loved them. Still love them. Last year, 2 years ago, as we've done these division previews, there's always been a team that we get to where it's like, yeah, we're going to give this team 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, because there's just not much to say about them. And frankly, no one really cares. If we go any further than that, no one's going to care. In the past, it's been the Orlando Magic. We've disrespected the Oklahoma City Thunder that way. It was just reality. It pains me, but this year, I think the Spurs are that team. They moved DeJounte Murray out. We saw Derek White go out to the Celtics midway through last year. And I guess rather than saying, what move do you like? What do you not like? What is the direction here in San Antonio? Because I know we're saying rebuild, but it doesn't even feel like they're properly aligned for a rebuild right now. I don't get it.
No, what's tough is I think the how much longer does Pop want to be on the sidelines for? I think that is looming over the entire franchise, and he has earned the right to decide that for himself and figure out whenever that time is right for him. And if it doesn't line up with the timeline of the franchise, so be it. I think he's earned that reputation and he's earned that privilege to be able to do that. But I think that's kind of the thing where as long as he's sticking it out with the team, they wanted to try to compete for him, but it's just they just don't have it anymore. So they played the card that they could with DeJounte Murray. I think Jakob Poeltl, I think other guys, or Doug McDermott can still be useful to some teams. I think we're just going to see them unload those kinds of players and see what kind of draft capital they have. I think the lone bright spot this season for the San Antonio Spurs is I think we'll see Keldon Johnson turn into a really good pro this season because, like we mentioned, maybe with a Christian Wood in previous years, who else are you going to give the ball to? I mean, it's that kind of a team this year. But I think Keldon Johnson is probably the biggest bright spot for the Spurs this season.
Going along with that Pop thought, and I'm on that same wavelength with you. I know he's enjoying himself. He said that he likes this different challenge. He likes the young guys. But there is that concern that even if he's able to shepherd them through another season or two, and they've tried, a soft reboot with DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge didn't work. They tried to go a little bit younger last year. They figured out that Murray, White, maybe even Keldon Johnson, those are good players, but they're not building block level players, and that's why they're hitting a harder reset button. It just feels like, though, even if they completely bottom out in a weird bookend to Pop's career, because that's the type of season that he came in coaching and was a year that they bottomed out.
Point.
He's not going to be around conceivably long enough to take whatever they get out of this and then grow it. That's going to fall on somebody else where that whatever Pop's vision is now may not translate to that other person. And yeah, he's earned that right, but there's a continuity issue. And I guess the last question I've got for you on San Antonio, I'm not a huge NBA draft guy. And a huge college basketball guy. I see players as they come in to the league and I make my judgments about them. But we've all heard Victor Wembanyama's name. We've all heard it. We know he's coming. He's the next big name. We get one of those every couple of years where that name has been circling for a while. Is this all worth it? Does this change direction if San Antonio lands that number one pick and like the bookend where they got Tim Duncan at the start of Pop's career, they get Victor instead? Is that the sole hope? And is this a massive underreach and failure if they swing and a miss on the number one here? They don't get it.
Well, here's the thing. To get the number one, you're going to have to be, for all intents and purposes, you're going to have to be really bad and hope the ping pong balls go your way. And I want to say this from strictly a basketball standpoint. How many games a year do you think the Spurs win solely because of Pop? Because he's a great coach and he outcoaches somebody else for a night and gets them a win. As great as that looks, and it will certainly benefit the youth on that team in learning how to win, they're hurting themselves in those draft standings, in the lottery standings, to the point where with Pop being around, maybe it costs them the difference between a number 3 pick and a number 9 pick, or, it could be that significant. And they're not drafting at the top of the first round very often. They haven't in the last 20 something years since Tim Duncan's been around. So it's kind of counterproductive. And again, Pop can do what he wants. He has earned that. And if he's having fun, let him continue to do it, because I'm not sure there's going to be many better coaches out there to fill that role. But to be able to get a Victor Wembanyama or whoever it may be, they're going to have to get that 1, 2, 3 pick and hit on it. And if you're kind of middling, semi-competing for the play-in tournament, whatever the case may be, it's going to be really hard to do that. And I think this team has made a lot out of mid to late first round draft picks. But I wonder how much they're hurting themselves by not going completely all in on this rebuild and trying to establish a new identity and hoping you hit right on the lottery.
You bring up a great point too. It's to me, it goes even beyond just Pop's in-game coaching. It's the fact that few coaches demand as much from guys in camp, in practice, that preparation. So you always have these role players, these second-round draft picks who are at least more than slightly outperforming what you thought, and it's just a better team in general than it probably should be. And yeah, you're right.
We see a lot of it in terms of franchises not knowing how to handle the twilight of a player's career. It's a very interesting dynamic when you've seen the Spurs and they're struggling to figure out how best to handle the twilight of Pop's career now. You hope for the Albert Pujols story where, it's just a magical story to end his career. But a lot of times, more times than not, handling that aging superstar who has been so good to your franchise, so good to your city, and meant so much, it's tough to handle when they're not that superstar anymore. And coaching is different. It doesn't rely on physical traits decaying over time like a player's career. But it's still very interesting to see how the Spurs navigate the last couple of years here in Pop's career.
There you go, San Antonio, because I love you. I gave you like 4 minutes.
I was going to say that was 4 or 5 minutes.
It should have been 90 seconds. All right, let's get to the team that finished last in the division. I have a hankering that they're probably not going to finish last this year, although maybe they would rather do that for one more season. This is the Houston Rockets, who, as you look up and down the roster, last season it was, yikes, this team is young, they're going to score some points, it's going to get ugly. But after a season of that, and you have another high draft pick, and Jabari Smith is coming in to add to Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., Jayshawn Tate, Alperen Sengun, there's a core being built here, and it's an edgy core. It is a high-flying core. It's a core that could give you some real fireworks. And I like it. I like where Houston is going. I think there's an identity. There's a little bit of a dangerousness about this team where you don't know if this is all going to work. There's some combustibility, and a lot of that falls on Kevin Porter Jr., and some of that is well-earned, and some of that might just be too much reputation. But I actually will tune into Houston Rockets games this year, just like I did last year, and be completely okay with that, even though they're not ready for prime time yet.
I think we call that league pass darlings, Joel.
Yeah.
They'll be exactly that. They're not going to be a team that competes for a playoff spot. I don't think so, at least. But I think they're going to be entertaining. I think one of the luckiest things that they had was Jabari Smith fall to them. I think that's that. We can call it maybe the best move they made all offseason,
Sure.
And it wasn't anything that they had to do. They just took whichever of the top 3 prospects fell to them, and it's the guy we all thought was going to go number 1. So I think I love everything about Jabari Smith. I like you. I paid less attention to college basketball than I used to, just by the nature of the evolution of life. You have less time, you've got work responsibilities, and my work responsibilities often revolve around the NBA game. So I don't get to see much college, but Auburn is one of the teams I did see more than most teams last year. And Jabari Smith has got it. Like he's got the mentality for it. He's got the skill set for it. He is a prototypical athletic 5-position kind of guy in the NBA. He's got some handle despite his size. The shooting stroke is awesome. The defense, he's not only willing, he's able. And I think he brings some intangibles. Having a dad that played in the league doesn't hurt either. I think that'll help him navigate things. But yeah, it's an exciting team. I thought they drafted really well this year. I thought they got some guys that can help them. And part of a rebuild is, and I think we're seeing it in Orlando. I don't mean to, I know you said you spend 2 minutes on Orlando most years, and this is not a team in the division here. But a lot of this with rebuilding teams, and it goes for Houston here, is you compile talent. You just compile it any way you can get it. Get 6, 7, 8, 9 guys who you think have got a chance. Find which 3 or 4 really gel together and fit what you want, and use the others to go get what else you need. So I think that's what they're in. They are an asset compiling mode, and these guys are going to get a chance to play. They're not going to be a good team. The rebuild is in full swing, and they want to see what they can get from the youngsters. So Kevin Porter Jr., I agree with everything you're saying. We'll see over time how much of the bad rap is earned versus just thrown on him. I think there's a little bit with Jalen Green too, maybe not from a behavioral standpoint, but can he be anything other than a scorer? He's not a big guy, and we know the scoring is there. What else can he do, though? But I think they're bringing in some guys who can be star-level players in a couple of years, but also they're bringing in the Şengüns of the world who are great role players and can fit into what they're trying to do. So it's not going to happen this year. It may not happen next year or the year after, but you can see where the building blocks are starting to be assembled.
And Şengün has really shown out, again, Eurobasket all summer. There's been big stat lines out of him. You saw it in flashes last year. He was good enough, essentially, that Houston went, Christian Wood doesn't need to be a part of this rebuild. Now, granted, there was locker room stuff with Wood and maybe not being the leader that they were hoping they would pay for him to be. But going back to Jabari Smith for a moment, again, I didn't get to watch him a whole ton. But what really excites me versus had it been Chet Holmgren or Banchero that had fallen to Houston is the knockdown shooting ability from a lot of different levels. Because, Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green both track as if they can be volume 3-point shooters down the line, but they're also guys who really like to get to the basket and are going to play above the rim, and they're going to give you that dynamic. So there's going to be a lot of times that you run plays to try to create space for them to get downhill and get towards the bucket. Jae'Sean Tate, rumors are that 3-point shooting has improved out of the corners. We'll see what that actually means. He's got to have a little stretchability, but he's a junkyard dog guy that's going to be around the basket, giving you those hustle plays. Şengün, a little bit of stretchability, but Jabari Smith's ability, I think, to move around the court and to be that outlet valve for the other things that are going on, and then to be able to put it on the deck like you talked about with those handles, to be able to run plays for him. Just long term, I like the theory of how those 5 are going to fit together. And then, like you said, up and down the bench, Ty Washington, Daishen Nix, Garrison Matthews as a shooter, KJ Martin, who supposedly doesn't want to be there, but we'll see if that happens or not. You've got young guys to figure out whether they're going to be a part of this or not. I don't really have a major concern for Houston other than why is Eric Gordon still on the roster, but we've been saying that for like 3 years. Sounds like he's playing the good soldier role. That's fine. But when you see what veteran shooters have fetched elsewhere and how highly valued they are for playoff teams, it just doesn't make sense to me that he still is a Rocket. Do you think, does he last the whole season in Houston? I can't imagine, but we keep saying this.
Yeah, I can't see it happening again this year, but I didn't see it happening last year either. Maybe he's that great locker room mentor kind of guy. And if he's willing to do that, then, more power to them. But yeah, I think we're seeing across the league, draft picks are being thrown around much more loosely than they have in previous years. So for a rebuilding team, that seems more enticing to me.
I'll say this for Eric Gordon. If he was able to play the good soldier route as the James Harden era collapsed and then stay through this rebuild and be a locker room guy like that and just stay sane and actually want to be there, he has an NBA coaching career ahead of him. Like
right?
He's built that up to show it. And there are few guys with that type of patience to be able to do it. All right, we are at time. So it is time to break down how we think the division is going to sort out from 1 to 5. We don't have to get into where they'll finish in the conference or anything like that. Just the divisional order itself. Matty Daggs, I'm going to put you on the spot first. How do you see this going in the Southwest?
I see Memphis repeating. I think they've got that culture. I'll go back to it. I don't know that I can overuse that statement when it comes to them, but I think they've got what it takes to build off of last season and be a really good team again this year.
All right. I'll go with Memphis at number 1 as well. I feel fairly confident about that. Even if Dallas gets better, even if New Orleans gets better, I don't think it's enough to catch what the Grizzlies have put down both on paper and on the court. Where do you see number 2 going?
I see Dallas coming in second. I do like where they're going, building around Luka and going in that direction of we've got one true superstar and we're going to build around him. The thing we didn't talk about with Dallas, which I think is a good X factor for them, Jason Kidd's a pretty darn good coach too. So I think that keeps them right where they are in second.
Okay. I will be there with you, but not confidently. It's like 55-45 for me because there's just that feeling that New Orleans might be that team that shows out, especially if we get that Zion Williamson season. But it's so many ifs. So we'll go with what we know. I'll put Dallas in second. I'll put New Orleans in third. I got to imagine that's where you've got the Pels as well.
I do. And like I said, if you told me right now that they were going to win the division, I wouldn't call you crazy. That's how I think. Again, the variance of how good this team could be compared to years past, I wouldn't put it past them. But I think if you nail me down to one, I think they are still in third, but an improved third place team for sure.
So who finishes last? Is it the Spurs or the Rockets? I'm going to put Houston in fourth and the Spurs in fifth. But as you alluded to, San Antonio just might be too good to be bad. I don't know.
I think that's exactly where it is. I think we'll differ there. Go San Antonio fourth. I'll call it the pop factor. I think he's good enough to win a few games a year on his own and put Houston, who is learning how to win, even as a coaching staff, they're learning how to win. They haven't had that success as a staff, whereas Pop has done it time and time again.
Matt Dagostino has been my guest here on Basketball by Association. You see him on NBA.com, NBA TV. Turner, where can people find you online, social media, all that good stuff?
Yeah, at Matt Dags 28 is Twitter. Oh, I don't know if you guys are into sports cards collecting. There's an IG Dags card collection as well. Let's put it this way: the rookie class will be fun to collect this coming season in the NBA.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being my guest here on Basketball by Association, episode 119. The Boris Diaw episode is in the books. We'll be coming back in about a week. I think the Central Division is up next. Don't quote me on that. Archie Shea will be back in studio here soon enough as well. Have a good one, everybody. Stay safe.